Good morning, everyone. In the last session, we discussed about what is atomicity and how do we achieve atomicity by using our data JPA. So before that, we discussed about what is the profile in the Spring Boot and why we need to go for profile and how to work with profiles, what are environments available for the project in the real time, and what are the challenges available when we are deploying our application to multiple environments, right? So for every project, multiple environments will be available like dev, SIT, UAT, and production. For every environment, the properties will be different for database, Kafka, Redis, payment gateways, third-party APIs like this. So changing these properties every time is very, very difficult. So to avoid that problem, we are going to use profiles concept in the Spring Boot. Okay. Now, so what kind of profiles we are creating? Dev properties, SIT, UAT, and prod properties. If you don't enable any profile, default profile will be loaded. If you want to load the particular profile, then you need to activate that profile by using this application.properties file. So which profile should be loaded? We can configure in main properties file, spring.profiles.active. Good. Suppose I don't want to hard code the profile name. Can we pass the profile in the runtime? Yes, we can pass the profile in the runtime also. When we are packaging our boot application as a jar file, you can run that jar file using this command. At the time of running the jar file, you can pass this argument for the profile. Even if you have something in the properties file, this command will override that profile. Whatever you are passing at the time of execution, that profile will be loaded by Spring Boot. Then after, we discussed about transaction in the data JPA. So here, when we are performing some operations with the database, I want to achieve atomicity. Atomicity nothing but either all operations should be successful or none of the operations should be successful. I want to insert two records into the table as one transaction. I want to insert one employee record and I want to insert one address record. If address record is inserted successfully, then only employee should be there in the database. If address is not inserted, then employee also should not be inserted. Now, if both queries are executed successfully, no problem. But after employee inserted, if we are getting some problem, then address will not be inserted. Then how do you roll back the transaction? In order to roll back the transaction, we will use transactional annotation rollback for exception.class. We are doing like this. Perfect. Then after, I have given the task how to insert one employee with multiple addresses and how to retrieve employee record along with the address using join query based on the given employee ID. Employee data available in one table, address data available in the another table. Based on the employee ID, you need to get the employee data as well as address data also. Anybody tried working? You need to try that. That is assignment, right? So please complete that. And in the data JPA, there is one topic available, guys, association mapping. That means how do you map the tables with the relationships concept. Now, so once WebMVC completed with the web application, you will understand that association mapping. Now I'm stopping the association mapping. I'm not talking about that now. Once our web application development completed, then you will get the better clarity how the relationships will be available. At that time, I will take one weekend class on association mapping, because same thing I need to explain for the project batch people also. We'll take a combined class in the next week, next Saturday or next Sunday. How do we manage association mapping with the database tables? How do you establish relationships? How to establish relationships among the tables by using data JPA. One to one, one to many, many to one, many to many relationships are available. We'll talk about that in the coming classes. Right. So with this, we are Except one topic, we are done with our data JPA concepts, right? So what we learnt in the data JPA, can you summarize quickly? We discussed about what is ORM, object relational mapping. Instead of representing our data in the text format, we are representing the data in the form of object format. What is the benefit? You can store the object, you can retrieve the data in the form of objects. Instead of dealing with the text data, we are dealing with the objects data. ORM stands for object relational mapping. Then after, we discussed about what is entity. What is entity? When you want to work with object relational mapping, our Java class should be mapped to database table. So there are some annotations available in order to map our Java class to database table. Entity class we have used. Then we discussed about what is data JPA. Already we have JDBC, Spring JDBC, Hibernate, ORM. But why we are going for data JPA? You no need to write the logic here. They are providing predefined methods. In order to develop our persistence layer, there are predefined methods available in the data JPA. Using that, we can perform operations. Without writing the logic, we can communicate with the database. So that's where JPA repositories concept is available. So mainly we are having two repositories here. The repositories providing predefined methods to perform CRUD operations. If you want to use data JPA, then you need to use the predefined repositories which are provided by JPA. What are those repositories available? One is CRUD repository, another one is JPA repository. CRUD repository and JPA repository. What is the difference between CRUD repository and JPA repository? CRUD repository means it will provide the 11 or 12 methods available to perform CRUD operations. When you go for JPA repository, we are having sorting, we are having pagination, we are having query by example. What is the meaning of pagination? Instead of retrieving all the records available in the table, we are retrieving the records based on the pages. Dividing total number of records into multiple pages is called as pagination. Then query by example. What is the meaning of query by example? What is the meaning of query by example? Query by example means I want to prepare the query dynamically. So here, based on the selected criteria, I want to retrieve the records. For that, we will go for query by example. Then after, we discussed about what we learned. We discussed about find by methods. What is the meaning of find by methods? What is the meaning of find by methods? If you want to retrieve the data by using non-select primary keys, if you want to retrieve the data by using non-select queries, non-primary keys, then you can go for find by methods. Then we discussed about custom queries. Okay, I want to execute my own query. I want to execute my own queries. Then you can go for custom queries. When we are going for custom queries, we need to know about SQL versus HQL. We need to know about SQL versus HQL. SQL is database dependent, whereas HQL is database independent queries. By using this HQL, we can communicate with the tables. You can perform all the CRUD operations, insert, update, delete also we can do by using this SQL and HQL. Then we discussed about time stamping. What is the meaning of time stamping? What is the meaning of time stamping? When the record is inserting, I want to populate created date. When the record is updated, I want to populate updated date. That is called time stamping. Then after, we discussed about primary keys. Okay. Then we discussed about composite primary key. What is the meaning of composite primary key? What is the meaning of composite primary key? When table is having more than one primary key, then it is called as a composite primary key. Okay. Then after we have seen generators. What is a generator? When we are inserting the record into table, we don't want to set the value for the primary key. Primary key value should be given by the JPA. For that we are using generators. Then we discussed custom generator. I have given a video on that. Custom generator. What is the meaning of custom generator? What is the meaning of custom generator? When our requirement is different. Okay. So I want to generate alphanumeric value for the primary key. Then we will go for the custom generator concept. If you want only numbers, then you can go for predefined generator. If you have a special requirement to work with the generators, then you need to go for custom generators concept. Then after custom generators, what we learned? What we learned? Embedded database. What is embedded DB? What is embedded DB? In-memory database. What is the meaning of in-memory database? So databases, we can use physical databases or we can use in-memory databases. You can go with either physical database or you can go with the in-memory database. Physical database means permanent. Even if our application is not running, the database will be available. In-memory database nothing but if our application is running, then only database will be available. If application is stopped, then database will not be available. When we should go for in-memory database? For practice, POC. When you are learning something new, when you want to do some practice, then only we will go for this in-memory database. Then we discussed about profiles in the Spring Boot. What is profile? What is profile? Profile is used to specify environment configuration. In the real time, for every application, multiple environments will be available. So when we want to deploy our application to multiple environments, changing the properties will become very difficult. So that's why we are going to maintain environment specific properties. We are going to maintain environment specific properties. Okay. Then we have seen transaction rollback. How do we go for transaction rollback and how to do the transactional rollback? Transaction rollback means when some problem occurred, then I want to achieve atomicity. Either all operations should be successful or none of the operations should be successful. Then we can go for transaction rollback. To roll back the transaction, we have a annotation called @transactional annotation. For which exception you want to roll back, also you can specify rollback for. Then you can specify that particular exception, like I want to roll back the transaction for null pointer or arithmetic or SQL or file not found, something. If you want to roll back for all the exceptions, then exception dot class will roll back the transaction. Got it? So these are the topics we learned from data JPA. From last 10 days, we are working on data JPA. So with this, here guys, one topic is there, which is very important, which is called association mapping. Nothing but relationships. How to work with relationships in the data JPA. One to one, one to many, many to one, many to many relationships are available. Okay, this topic we are going to discuss in the coming classes. Once we learn web application development, then we will see how to work with this association mapping. Good. Connection pooling here. Whenever we are running data JPA application, that connection pooling is taken care by Spring Boot by default by using Hikari CP. Default connection pool is available in the Spring Boot, which is Hikari CP. You no need to write any separate connection pool in the Spring Boot. Hikari CP connection pool is available. You see, Hikari pool is starting by default. So inbuilt connection pool is available for the Spring Boot. You no need to set up that. If you want to customize that connection pool properties, you can write it spring dot hikari dot data source dot hikari auto commit, hikari connection timeout, hikari data source, minimum connections required for the pool, ideal timeout for the pool. So you can do the minimum max lifetime for the connection, name of the pool. So you can customize the pool properties, but you no need to write any code in order to set up connection pool in the data JPA. By default, it is using Hikari CP as the default connection pool. You no need to write it. But if you go for JDBC, then what we need to do? If you go for JDBC, then what we need to do? Connection pool will be available or connection pool will not be available. When you go for JDBC, that connection pool will not be available. We need to write the connection pool on our own. We need to write the connection pool on our own. But when you go for data JPA, the connection pool will be provided by using Hikari CP. If you want, you can customize the properties in the properties file. Okay, fine. So this is the summary for data JPA, and here we have used some annotations also. These are the annotations that we learned from data JPA. We used these annotations as part of our data JPA. Okay, we used one more annotation called @transactional. @transactional annotation, which is used to roll back the transaction. Entity, ID, table, column, generated value, generic generator, creation timestamp, update timestamp, embeddable, embedded ID, transactional. When you are @modifying. Why we need to go for @modifying? When you want to execute custom non-select query, then we will go for @modifying annotation. And when you are dealing with binary data, then you need to use one annotation called @lob annotation. What is the meaning of @lob? What is the meaning of @lob? @lob means large object. If you want to deal with binary data by using this data JPA, data type we are going to take as a byte array. When it is byte array, we are going to specify by using @lob annotation. Clear? Good. Anything else? @query annotation. Yes. What is the meaning of @query annotation? What is the meaning of @query annotation? If you want to execute a custom query by using data JPA, I want to give my query for the JPA for the execution, then we will go for @query annotation. By using that @query, we can execute select query as well as non-select query also. Good. Anything else that we learned extra apart from this? Param, that is fine. If you give method parameter name, positional parameter name same, @param is optional. If you give different, then @param is required. Otherwise, it is optional. @data. I have not explained that Lombok. That is Lombok annotation. We will see how to work with Lombok. Lombok. Okay, if you know, you can use it anyhow. I will explain what is Lombok. Sequence generator. Yeah, when I go for generic generator, when you are working with Oracle, if you want to specify the sequence, then you can configure @sequence generator for that. Okay. Generic generator means custom generator. When you want to specify, then we are going to use generic generator. Yeah. So with this, guys, we are done with Spring Core module, which is the base module for our Spring framework, which will provide fundamental concepts of the Spring like IOC container, dependency injection, and auto wiring. right? So if you want to develop your application with loosely coupling, then you need to go for IOC container, dependency injection, and auto wiring. Then after, we learnt about Spring Boot. Spring Boot is one approach to develop Spring based application with the less configurations, right? Then after, we learnt about data JPA, which is used to communicate with the database by using repositories concept. Without writing much logic, we want to communicate with the database. For that, we are going for data JPA. Now, we are going for web MVC. What is that? Web MVC. What is the purpose of web MVC? What is the purpose of web MVC? Web MVC is used to develop web application by using Spring Boot. If you want to develop a web application by using Spring Boot, then you can go for web MVC module. So from today, we are going to learn what is Spring Web MVC, how to develop web applications by using Spring Boot. As of now, from last 1 month, 30 to 40 days of time, we are creating the projects, but those are standalone projects. Okay, so there is no controller concept in the application to execute. Whatever the project we developed as of now is a standalone, which will run only in one computer. Now I want to develop a web application. Got it? Fine. We are going to start Spring Web MVC from today. So first let me set the content, what we are going to learn as part of this Spring Web MVC. First, we are going to learn what is Web MVC. Then Spring MVC architecture. What is Web MVC and what is Spring MVC architecture? Then first, web application development. Then we are going to learn about embedded servers. How to work with Jetty server. By default, we are getting as what? By default, we are getting as a Tomcat. Working with Jetty. That means by default, we are getting Tomcat as a embedded server, but we need to work with Jetty as a embedded server. How to change from Tomcat to Jetty, we are going to understand. Then we are going to learn time leaf. Okay, so earlier we worked with JSP for the presentation, but in the Spring MVC we have option for time leaf as well as JSP for the presentation. Some projects will use JSP, some projects will use time leaf. Spring supports for both JSP and time leaf as a presentation technology. Then we will see how to send the data, from controller to UI. I have the data in my database. How can I send the data from controller to UI? That we are going to learn. Then next one, how to send data from UI to controller. Web application means these two concepts only. How to send the database data to the UI and display that. How to send the data from the UI to controller. So here we are going to learn about query parameters, path parameters, request body. Query parameters, path parameters and request body will be available. How to develop forms, how to develop time leaf forms. Okay, I want to develop one form based application by using time leaf. Then after we will see form validations, how to perform form validations. Then we will see email sending. We are going to understand how to send emails by using our Spring Boot. Okay, so these topics that we are going to learn as part of our web MVC. What is Web MVC? What is our Web MVC architecture? How to create first web application? How to work with embedded servers, right? How to work with Jetty server? How to work with time leaf? Time leaf is a new technology that is used for user interface development. Earlier we used JSP, right? Now we are going to use time leaf. Then how to send the data from controller to UI? How to send the data from UI to controller? What is query parameter? What is path parameter? What is request body? How do we develop forms by using time leaf? How to perform form validations? How do we send emails by using our Spring Boot application? This part we are going to learn. Got it? Along with this, we can learn about actuators in the Spring Boot. So there is a concept called actuators. What is actuator? How to work with actuators in the Spring Boot. So this is agenda for next 1 week to 10 days of time. So once we complete these topics, then we can go for REST API development. So once you understand these concepts, then easily we will go for REST API development for microservices by using Spring Boot. You got it? Perfect. There is a concept called form bindings. Good. Yep. JBoss is not a embedded server. That is the external server. Right. Request body, response body. Okay. Just guys, see the content that we are going to learn for next few days. Exception handling JUnit will come once we learn REST APIs. Once we learn the REST API, then we will see exception handling. JUnit will be covered as part of tools at the end. All right. Actuators I have added. Guys, are you clear with the agenda for WebMVC? Yes, basically we need to understand how to develop web applications by using Spring Boot. In order to develop web application by using Spring Boot, we are using a concept called Spring Web MVC. Spring Web MVC is one module in the Spring framework Spring Web MVC is one module in the Spring framework, which is used to develop both web applications as well as RESTful services, right? So what is Web MVC? Spring Web MVC. Spring Web MVC, it is one of the module in Spring framework. How we have core module, JDBC module, ORM module, security module. Similarly, in the Spring, there is one module called Web MVC. So Web MVC is one of the module in Spring framework. It is used to develop both web and distributed applications. Develop both web and distributed applications. What is the meaning of web application? Web application is used for C2B communication. So I will develop one application which will contain user interface. Then customer will communicate with our application directly. That is called customer to business. C2B communication. For C2B, we are going to develop one application. Then next one, we are going to develop distributed application also. Distributed applications are nothing but B2B communication. Nothing but REST APIs or web services will be available. By using this Web MVC, we can develop customer to business communication application. We can develop business to business communication applications also. Now, when you go for Spring Web MVC, Spring Web MVC supports multiple presentation technologies. Supports multiple presentation technologies. When you go for servlets, we need to use only JSP as a presentation technology. But when you go for Spring Web MVC, it supports for multiple presentation technologies like JSP and TimeLeaf. So you can use JSP as a presentation technology, or you can use TimeLeaf also as a presentation technology. WebMVC is one of the module in the Spring framework. It is used to develop both web and distributed application. Web applications are used for customer to business communication. Distributed applications are used for business to business communication. And another advantage we are getting with the WebMVC, not only one presentation technology, it supports multiple presentation technologies. What are the presentation technologies it is supporting? It will support for JSP and TimeLeaf. And WebMVC supports form binding. When you go for WebMVC, WebMVC supports form binding. Supports form binding. Form binding nothing but form data will be mapped to Java object. Object data will be mapped to the form. Form data will be mapped to the object. If you go for servlets, when there is a form, you need to capture the data by using request.get parameter. Then you need to store the data into Java object. But when you go for WebMVC, that logic is not required. You no need to capture the data from the form. Whenever you submit the form, it will take the form data, it will store into Java object by default. That is called form binding. Because developing the forms is not only our project requirement, capturing the form data is not only our project requirement. Okay, in every web application, forms will be available. We need to take the data from the form. To take the data from the form, we are using request.get parameter. If I have 100 forms in the project, at 100 places I need to write the same logic, request.get parameter. So to avoid that problem, in the WebMVC, there is a concept called form binding. What is the meaning of form binding? Form data will be mapped to object. Object data will be mapped to form. We no need to write the logic, request.get parameter to capture form data. Form binding is a inbuilt technology which is available in the Web MVC. So WebMVC makes our application development process easy. So WebMVC is a simplifying web application development process. So if you go for servlets to develop the web application, lot of code we need to write, lot of boilerplate code we need to write. But here we can avoid that boilerplate code by using WebMVC concept, right? What is WebMVC? WebMVC is one of the module available in the Spring framework. What is the purpose of this WebMVC module? It is used to develop both web applications and distributed application. What is the meaning of web application? Which is used for customer to business, Gmail, web application. What about a distributed application? Business to business. If one application is communicating with the another application, then that is called as a distributed application. What is the advantage of going with the WebMVC? What is the advantage of going with the WebMVC? WebMVC supports multiple presentation technologies. You can use JSP as a presentation, or you can use TimeLeaf also as a presentation technology. And WebMVC supports for form binding. What is the meaning of form binding? What is the meaning of form binding? You no need to capture the data from the form in the controllers, right? Whenever you submit the form, WebMVC will take the form data, will give it to you in the form of object. That object you can directly save in the database by using data JPA. Lot of code is reduced when you go for WebMVC with the data JPA. So I will submit the form. Form data will come in the object. Give the object to the JPA repository. It will insert the record into table. With 3-4 lines of code, we can complete our record insertion process in the web application. Okay, good. Now, so WebMVC introduction, very simple. It is a module in the Spring. It is used to develop both web and distributed applications. Web applications are used for customer to business. Distributed applications are used for business to business. WebMVC supports multiple presentation technologies. WebMVC supports form binding. Now, WebMVC architecture, Spring WebMVC architecture. That means when we develop our application by using WebMVC module, how it is going to work in the background. So what is Spring WebMVC architecture? Let us see here. What is our WebMVC architecture? Spring WebMVC architecture. Guys, this is called as WebMVC architecture. Please look at the diagram. Just look at the diagram. Numbering is also available. WebMVC architecture. If the project is developed by using Spring WebMVC, when users send a request to the web application, this is how it is going to execute in the background. This is execution flow of our Spring web applications or Spring Boot web applications. Right. See here. When you go for MVC architecture, when you go for WebMVC architecture, mainly we need to talk about a concept called dispatcher servlet. There is a concept called dispatcher servlet. Then second one, handler mapper. Third one, controller. Fourth one, model and view. Model and view. Fifth one, view resolver. Sixth one is view. Okay. So when you are going to develop a web application by using Spring Web MVC module, then we need to know about these concepts. Then only we can develop the project by using Web MVC. Then only we can understand how Web MVC application is running. Okay. Here, if you see dispatcher servlet, dispatcher servlet is called as front controller. Whenever you send any request to our WebMVC application, that request will be received by this dispatcher servlet. Dispatcher servlet is called as a front controller, which will take every request and it will do some processing and it will give the response to the client. So whatever the requests that are coming to our application, okay, so from UI, any request is coming from UI or from user, any request that is coming to the application, who is going to receive that request? That request will be received by dispatcher servlet. What is dispatcher servlet? Dispatcher servlet is a predefined class available in the Spring MVC. It is like a normal servlet. It is like a normal servlet, but we no need to develop that servlet. It is already available in the Web MVC. This is called predefined servlet, or it is called framework servlet. It is called front controller. So it is responsible to perform pre-processing, pre and post processing. So when the request comes, who should handle that request will be identified by dispatcher servlet. So the complete control will be taken care by dispatcher servlet in the web application. Dispatcher servlet is a predefined servlet which is called as front controller. Every request will come to dispatcher servlet only in the MVC application. Dispatcher servlet will do pre-processing. Before executing the actual logic, pre-processing will happen. After the logic is executed, post-processing will happen. So when you perform any operation in the web application, first dispatcher servlet will be available. Dispatcher servlet is called as a front controller in the Spring Web MVC. It is a predefined servlet which is responsible to perform pre-processing and post-processing. The next one, handler mapper is available. It will identify which controller should handle request. Okay, whenever client send a request in our application, multiple screens will be available, multiple controllers will be available to handle the request. When user click on login button, which controller should handle that request, that will be identified by handler mapper. Handler mapper is used to identify which controller should handle this request. Now when user perform some operation, request will go to dispatcher servlet. Then dispatcher servlet will talk to handler mapper. Dispatcher servlet will talk to handler mapper. So dispatcher servlet will take the request, will give the request information to handler mapper. What that handler mapper will do? It will identify this request should be handled by which class in the project. In our project, multiple classes will be available. Multiple requests are coming to our application. Which request should be handled by which controller will be identified by handler mapper. Now, handler mapper will identify the controller data. Handler mapper will give the controller data back to dispatcher servlet. Then dispatcher servlet will go and talk to controller. It will call the controller method. What is the meaning of controller? Responsible to handle request. Responsible to handle the request and provide model and view as a response. Okay, controller will execute. Who will call the controller method? Programmer will call the controller method. Dispatcher servlet will call the controller method. Huh. Who will call the handler mapper? Programmer will call the handler mapper. Dispatcher will call the handler mapper. Huh. User will send a request. When user send the request, request will go to dispatcher servlet. What the dispatcher servlet will do? Hey, handler mapper, I got one request. You check which class should handle this request. In our project, there are multiple controllers available. Which controller should handle this request should be identified by handler mapper. Handler mapper identified. Boss, login controller is responsible to handle this request. Registration controller responsible to handle this request. Forgot password controller responsible to handle this request. For every request, one controller method will be available. Which controller should execute? That will be identified by handler mapper. Handler mapper will identify that and will give the information to dispatcher servlet. Then what the dispatcher servlet will do? It will go and talk to that particular controller method. Controller will execute the logic. It is responsible to handle the request. Our controller will talk to service and our controller will talk to service. Service will talk to repository. Controller will talk to service. Service will talk to repository. They will perform the remaining operation, right? Controller is going to talk to service. Controller will talk to service and service will talk to repository to communicate with the database. Once that process is completed, controller will send the response to dispatcher servlet in the form of model and view object. Model represents data, view represents our presentation file. Once the request processing is completed, what response we should send to the client and in which page that response should be displayed, that will be represented by model and view. Who will give the model and view? Model and view will be given by controller. Model means a map, key and value pair. What data you want to send to the controller, you will represent by using model in the form of key and value. Where this data should be displayed, for that one view page will be available. It may be a JSP file or it may be a timely file. Good. Now let us see here dispatcher servlet. Can you tell me what is a dispatcher servlet? What is dispatcher servlet? Dispatcher servlet is called as a front controller. What is the responsibility of this front controller? What is the responsibility of this front controller? This front controller is responsible to perform pre-processing and post-processing. That is a predefined servlet. Dispatcher servlet is a predefined servlet. It is responsible to perform pre-processing and post-processing. Then when the request comes to the dispatcher, what it will do immediately? It will talk to handler mapper. What is the role of a handler mapper? What is the role of a handler mapper? Come on. Handler mapper is responsible to identify which controller is responsible to handle the request. In our project, multiple controllers will be available. In every controller, multiple methods also will be available. So which class, which method should execute for this request, that will be identified by handler mapper and it will give the information to dispatcher servlet. Then what the dispatcher servlet will do? Go and talk to controller method. Controller will talk to service. Service will talk to repository. Once that processing is completed, controller will return model and view object to the dispatcher servlet. What is the meaning of model and view object? Model is a map to store the data. I want to send employee data to the UI. Key value. I want to send book data to the UI. Key value. What data you want to send to the UI, that we will represent by using model. This data should display in the which page? We have multiple pages: login page, registration page, dashboard, logout, so many pages available. In which page, which data should display, that will be represented by model and view. So here model represents data, model represents data and view represents UI page. View represents UI page. In which page what data you want to display, that will be represented by using model and view. Tell me, what is a dispatcher servlet? What is a dispatcher servlet? Dispatcher servlet is a predefined servlet class in the Spring Web MVC. What is the role of the dispatcher servlet in the Spring Web MVC? Which is acting as a front controller. What is the meaning of front controller? It is responsible for handling every request, pre-processing and post-processing. Pre-processing means before controller execution. Post-processing means after controller execution. The logic will be taken care by our dispatcher servlet. Then once the request comes to the dispatcher, what it will do? It will talk to handler mapper. What is a handler mapper? What is a handler mapper? It is also a predefined class in the Spring MVC which is responsible to identify which request should be handled by which controller. In our project, multiple controllers will be available. Every controller will have multiple methods. Which controller, which method is responsible to handle the request will be identified by handler mapper. Then give the data to dispatcher. Then what the dispatcher will do? It will go and talk to our controller method. What controller will do? Talk to service, talk to repository, do the operation, request handling. Then finally, it will return model and view to the dispatcher. What is the meaning of model and view to the dispatcher? Model represents data, view represents presentation file. Which page you want to display for the user? What data you want to display to the user in that page will be represented by model and view component. Are you clear? Now, once controller has given model and view to the dispatcher, then dispatcher will talk to view resolver. What is view resolver? To identify where view files available in project. Okay, so in our project, in some location my view files will be available. In which location our view files are available, that will be identified by view resolver. It will tell that the view files are available in this location. It will go to project and it will identify where the view files are available. It will locate the files, where the files path, what is the path of the files, and what is that file. Is it a JSP or is it a time leaf? Is it a JSP or is it a time leaf? That information will be given to dispatcher servlet. View resolver is responsible to identify where the view files are available and will give the location of the view files to dispatcher servlet. Then dispatcher servlet will talk to view to render model data on the view page. Whatever the model is having, map, that map data, it should print on the web page, right? To print that map data on the web page, dispatcher servlet will use view component. Final response will be prepared here for the user. Once the response is prepared by the view, it will give the response to dispatcher. Dispatcher will send the final response to the client. That means lot of things will happen in the background. But as a programmer, what we need to do? We just need to develop the controller. Remaining things will be taken care by WebMVC. Okay, you no need to develop handler mapper. You no need to develop view resolver. You no need to develop view. You no need to develop dispatcher servlet also. Who will take care of all those things? MVC. What is our responsibility? Just to develop the controller. What is the meaning of controller? Responsible to handle the request, right? And response. Controller is called as request handler. When the request comes, controller should execute, should give the data in the form of model and view. Model represents data in the form of key value. View represents our logical file name. Are you able to follow this? Now, can you tell me, What components are available in the Spring Web MVC architecture? What components are available in the Spring Web MVC architecture? What is the first one? The first one is dispatcher servlet. What is the second one? Handler mapper. Third one, controller. Fourth one, view resolver. Fifth one, view. What is a dispatcher servlet? What is a dispatcher servlet? Dispatcher servlet is a predefined servlet class which is acting as a front controller in the Web MVC. What is the meaning of a front controller in the Web MVC? What is the meaning of front controller in the Web MVC? It is responsible to perform pre-processing and post-processing. What is the meaning of pre-processing? Before controller execution, after controller execution, pre-processing and post-processing. Okay, then what is a handler mapper? What is a handler mapper? It is used to identify which method is responsible to handle this request. Who will talk to handler mapper? Dispatcher servlet. Whenever the request comes, dispatcher servlet will take the request and will talk to handler mapper to identify which controller is responsible to handle that. Controller will give the information to dispatcher. Then dispatcher will go to the controller, will call the controller method. Controller will execute the logic by talking to service and repository. Then finally, controller will give model and view object to the dispatcher. What is there in the model? What is there in the model? Data in the form of key and value. What about the view? What about the view? View is a logical file name. View is a logical file name. Then once the controller has given model and view, then what the dispatcher servlet will do? It will talk to view resolver. What is view resolver? What is view resolver? It is used to identify where the view files available in our project. To identify where the view files available in the project, it will talk to view resolver. What view resolver will do? Locate where the file is available. What is that file? Is it a JSP or is it a timely? Take that information, give to dispatcher. Then finally what dispatcher will do? It will talk to view component. What is the purpose of view component? Render. What is the meaning of rendering? Processing. Whatever the data available in the model, it should be printed on the web page. That is a response page. Response page will be constructed by view. Take the model data, keep in the web page. Then give it to dispatcher. What dispatcher will do? Send that response to the client. So request response will be taken care by dispatcher servlet, which is a predefined servlet, which is called as a framework servlet, which is called as a front controller. It is responsible for pre-processing and post-processing. Are you clear? Good. Handler mapper. What is the role of a handler mapper? What is the role of a handler mapper? Handler mapper is responsible to identify which controller should handle this request. What is controller? What is controller? To handle the request and give the response in the form of model and view. View resolver. What is view resolver? Identify where the view files are available. View. Render model data on the view. Send that response to the dispatcher. Dispatcher will send the final response to the client. This is called Spring Web MVC architecture. How a web application will execute in the Spring framework. How a request will be processed in the Spring Web MVC. This is the flow. Without having this knowledge, developing the project is difficult. So you need to know what is MVC architecture in the Spring, what is the dispatcher servlet, what is a handler mapper, what is a controller, what is a view resolver, what is view. Look at that. That numbering is also very important. first request will come to the dispatcher. It will give to handler mapper, identify the controller, give to dispatcher. Then dispatcher will call controller method. Controller will execute the logic by talking to service and repository. And the controller will return model and view object. Model represents data in the form of key and value. View represents file name, presentation file. Then dispatcher servlet will talk to view resolver to identify where the view files are available and identify what is the view file. Then it will give to dispatcher. Dispatcher will talk to view. Then it will render model data on the view and it will send final response to the dispatcher. Dispatcher will send that response to the client. Request and response. Dispatcher servlet is like a security guard. Okay, when you go for a supermarket, if you go for Vijeta or D-Mart, supermarkets are available, right? When you go for a supermarket, security guard will be available. What that security guard will do? He will check, do you have any luggage with you? Okay, that is called pre-processing. That is called pre-processing. If you have any bag, he will take the bag, he will keep in the rack, he will give the token for you. Then you will go inside that supermarket, you will do some shopping. Then once the shopping is completed, you will come out. When you are coming out, they will check the bill post processing. So anybody who want to enter into that supermarket, he need to talk to that security guard. Pre-processing, post-processing, entry, exit will be taken care by that security guard in the supermarket. Similarly, in our web application, request entry, request exit will be taken care by dispatcher. Dispatcher servlet is like a security guard for the Spring Web MVC module. Dispatcher servlet is like a security guard for the Web MVC module. What it will do? Entry, checking, exit, checking. Request entry, request exit will be taken care by dispatcher servlet. That's why it is called as front controller. Dispatcher servlet is called as a front controller. Any request which is coming, any response which is going will happen through dispatcher servlet. You got my point? Yes. Yep. What is Web MVC, guys? Web MVC is one of the module in the Spring framework. It is used to develop both web and distributed application. Web application nothing but customer to business communication. Distributed application nothing but business to business communication. Web MVC supports multiple presentation technologies like JSP and TimeLeaf. You can use anything. You can use anything. But in the market, people are using these two. No, people are using Angular or React. Okay, just for knowledge purpose, we will understand. WebMVC supports form binding. What is the meaning of form binding? What is the meaning of form binding? Form data will be captured in the form of object. Object data will be captured in the form of form. MVC architecture. In the MVC, what are the components are important? Dispatcher servlet. What is the role of that? Pre and post processing. We are calling it as a front controller. Then what is a handler mapper? Handler mapper is used to identify which controller should handle our request. What is the controller? Responsible to handle the request and provide model and view object as response. What is the model and view? Model represents data and view represents UI page. What is the view resolver? Identify where the view files available in the project. What is the view? Render model data on view page. What is the meaning of rendering? Process. Render model data on the view page. Okay. Now, so with this knowledge, we need to develop our Spring Web MVC application. First, we are going to use TimeLeaf as a presentation technology. Can you try that before coming to Monday class? Just to give you a try whether you are able to develop your first web application by using Spring Web MVC. Anyhow, I will explain that in the Monday class. today's assignment. Every day assignment will be available. After the class completed, you need to work on the assignments. Develop Spring Web MVC application. Develop web application using Spring Boot. Develop web application using Spring Boot plus time leaf to display welcome message to user. Okay, develop web application using Spring Boot plus time leaf to display welcome message to user in the browser, not on the console. System.out.println, no. So I want to see that welcome message on the browser. I have not explained, but give it a try. So do some task, research how to develop first web MVC application by using Spring Boot. We are going to discuss that in the Monday session. So today and tomorrow you have time. Complete JPA assignments. Whatever we have assignments in the JPA, around 11 assignments available in the JPA. Today complete them. Tomorrow do some research on developing the web application by using Spring Boot. Tomorrow we don't have class. We have next class on Monday to develop our first application by using Boot and Timeleaf. Tomorrow 9 o'clock Spring Boot with MongoDB workshop is available. So don't miss that. 9 to 11 online workshop will be available for the Spring Boot with MongoDB. YouTube live also will be available. Zoom class also available. Please join for that workshop to understand what is MongoDB. As of now, we have seen how to work with MySQL database, how to work with a H2 database. These are relational. Tomorrow we will see MongoDB, how to work with MongoDB. MongoDB is a NoSQL database. Zoom link we have shared in your WhatsApp group also for the tomorrow's workshop. Please don't miss that. Okay, good. Thank you guys. With this, I'm stopping for today. Happy weekend. Please complete the assignments. We'll meet on Monday. Today evening, JRTP class also not available, right? We have our next class on Monday. Thank you. Online students, anybody having any questions? Online people?
By February ending, it will be the morning batch will be get completed, right, sir?
Yes, sir, mostly.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Ashok, in this class also, at the end, we will have a mini project, right?
Sorry?
For this class also, we will have a mini project, right?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
We will get any placement after completing the course here.
Assistance will be available, sir. Guarantee will not be given.
Okay.
Good. Thank you guys. We'll meet in Monday.